That meant her original fine had become, at best, a weak punch thrown at someone wearing armor. Her entire campaign was losing steam, and she knew it. Still, she tried to keep control. The next morning, a representative from the HOA board named Lydia stopped by under the guise of a courtesy inspection. She was polite, nervous even, and carried a clipboard that looked more like a prop than a legal document. I walked her around the property, pointed out the reinforced corners, the double gate lock system, and the state-required signage. When she asked if I had a containment plan in case of an escape, I pulled out a laminated folder containing all the permits, safety procedures, and even the contact number for a licensed bison wrangler 3 towns over. She looked almost relieved. I had a feeling not everyone on the board was thrilled about being dragged into Karen's personal feud. Later that week, I got a surprise visit from a local reporter. Apparently, someone had tipped off the press about the ongoing saga, and now they wanted to do a human interest story. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn this into a spectacle. But then I realized that the HOA had been quietly feeding their version of events to the community, painting me as some rogue rancher unleashing beasts for revenge. The truth deserved a voice too. I agreed to the interview. The piece aired 2 nights later. It was light-hearted, cheeky even. They showed footage of the bison grazing peacefully, highlighted the legality of my permits, and ended with a slow-motion clip of one calf playfully running near a fence line. The reporter described me as the cowboy who fenced the law with logic, and the whole thing ended with a chuckle-worthy line about how sometimes the best way to shut down nonsense is with a little grass-fed dignity. Karen was not amused. The next HOA newsletter arrived with an emergency section titled, Public Safety Update. It featured a hilariously dramatic article about the risks of sizable untamed wildlife and warned parents to keep children away from the back greenbelt. One paragraph even suggested that nearby residents consider motion sensor sprinklers to deter the animals, as if bison were no different than raccoons. I nearly choked on my coffee reading it. By now, other neighbors were beginning to pick sides. Some thought the bison were a menace. Others were secretly thrilled to have something exciting to talk about. One couple even asked if they could host a photo shoot for their kid's birthday with a bison in the background. I politely declined. Didn't want to start a zoo, but I appreciated the gesture. The mood was shifting, and Karen felt it. She responded by organizing a petition. She went door to door with a clipboard, trying to collect signatures to have the animals removed. What she didn't count on was that many people were tired of her power trip. A few politely declined. Others flat out refused. One neighbor told me she asked if he was concerned for his dog's emotional stability. He replied, "My dog sleeps 22 hours a day and hasn't even noticed the bison." Only a few actually signed, mostly the HOA loyalists and one guy who Karen bakes cookies for every Christmas. In retaliation, Karen began pushing for a new policy at the next board meeting. Something about redefining hazardous agricultural activity within a set perimeter of common areas. I knew it was aimed squarely at me. But again, her timing was terrible. The very next day, a group of school children visited the local farmers market and saw the bison from afar. Their teacher took a picture and posted it online with a caption thanking local ranchers for maintaining healthy ecosystems. It got picked up by the local nature group and shared over 1,000 times. Karen's campaign to label the bison as monstrous threats now had to compete with school kids calling them majestic. The board meeting was an awkward affair. Karen tried to deliver her motion with her usual self-righteous tone, but this time there was pushback. One member asked why the HOA was spending so much time on a single neighbor's livestock when real maintenance issues were being ignored. Another said she was tired of being dragged into a feud that seemed personal. The vote was postponed. Later that night, I was out near the fence checking the electric sensors when I noticed something odd. The gate that faced the jogging trail had been left unlatched. That was strange. I'd secured it myself earlier. I double-checked the lock, then pulled the security camera footage. What I saw wasn't just suspicious, it was infuriating. Around 5:47 p.m., an HOA landscaper had wandered up to the gate with a weed trimmer, opened the latch to pass through, and walked into the greenbelt to clear some brush. But when he came back out, he forgot to close it properly. He didn't even check it. The gate swung open just a bit and stayed that way for hours. If one of the bison had wandered in that direction, They could have easily walked straight into the jogging trail or, worse, the HOA park. My bison hadn't moved because they were too busy rolling in mud on the other side of the pasture. But the risk had been our eel. I didn't yell. I didn't call the HOA in a rage. I simply downloaded the footage, edited it for clarity, and saved it to a USB drive. The next time Karen accused me of negligence, I'd be ready. Because this wasn't just about fences or animals anymore. This was about control, accountability, and who got to dictate the rules when the rulemaker couldn't follow them herself. The bison were here to stay. But now, so was the truth. It was just after sunrise when my phone buzzed with a barrage of messages. At first, I figured someone was sharing another meme of Karen. Those had been floating around lately, especially the one with her holding a bullhorn labeled Buffalo. But this was different. One message from my neighbor Cole simply read, "Dude, your buffalo are in the park." I stood frozen on the porch, the coffee in my hand suddenly forgotten. For a split second, my heart sank. I raced down to the pasture, where sure enough, the main gate on the west side was wide open, and the bison were gone. Not all of them, just 2 adults and a calf. I followed the fresh hoofprints across the damp grass, past the trail line, straight into the shared HOA green space. And there they were. The calf was happily chasing butterflies near the edge of the park's swing set, while the 2 adults grazed calmly by the community fountain. It would have been picturesque if not for the screaming residents. One woman held her small dog like a shield. Another was on the phone with emergency services, yelling something about a buffalo stampede, which was hilarious considering the animals were moving slower than molasses uphill. I walked briskly toward them, staying calm, making no sudden movements. Years of working with animals had taught me panic never helps. What did help, however, was a 5-gallon bucket filled with sweet feed. I shook it gently and called out, and like obedient cows at dinner time, the bison began to plod toward me. Just as I got them halfway back across the field, a police cruiser pulled into the HOA lot, lights flashing but siren off. An officer stepped out, hands in the air, as if he were facing down armed fugitives. I quickly waved to get his attention and explained that the animals were mine, fully permitted and not aggressive. To his credit, he didn't escalate things. In fact, once the bison were back inside the fence, he looked more amused than concerned. He asked to see the permits, which I provided, and then he chuckled as he said, "You wouldn't believe the call we got. Lady said there were buffalo attacking children. One of the calmest situations I've ever responded to." Of course, that lady was Karen. She was across the field, arms folded, lips pursed so tightly they looked like they could pop off her face. As soon as the officer turned away, she marched over to me with steam practically pouring out of her ears. "This is it," she hissed, "you've crossed the line now." I kept my cool. I told her the gate had been tampered with. She called that an excuse. I said I had footage. That shut her up. Back at my house, I pulled up the footage on the monitor. At 4:16 a.m., just before dawn, someone had approached the gate from the Greenbelt side, outside the property. The video showed a person in a hoodie, carrying what looked like bolt cutters. They snipped the chain, lifted the latch, and disappeared into the dark. Less than 15 minutes later, the bison wandered through the opening. The angle wasn't perfect, but I enhanced it enough to make out a few key details, like the HOA badge on the windbreaker. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but there was no denying the intruder wasn't random. Someone had intentionally opened that gate. I sent a copy of the video to the local sheriff's office and CC'd the HOA board. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. By that evening, word had spread and the drama went nuclear. At the emergency board meeting the next day, half the board looked like they'd aged 10 years. Steve, the only one who had voted against fining me originally, called the meeting to order. Karen sat silently, arms crossed, refusing to look up from her binder. When Steve played the video, gasps went around the room. Even Karen's closest supporter, a guy named Mark who'd always backed her motions, shook his head and muttered something under his breath. The sheriff didn't make any arrests that day, but he promised an investigation. The bolt cutters were still at the scene, which meant fingerprints were a possibility. I had no doubt they'd trace it back to someone with HOA access. That meant Karen or one of her inner circle. The weight of their carelessness was enormous. Had the bison harmed someone, it could have turned into a disaster. But the real kicker was that it wasn't my security that failed. It was theirs. The next morning, local news showed up again.